In the lawless quiet of Shallow Creek, where mercy was rarer than rain, a man rode in with no name and no past. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. But what he did that night, when two twin girls were sold like livestock in a whiskey-soaked saloon, stopped the whole West in its tracks. Was he a bounty hunter, an outlaw, or something even darker? No one knew. But after that night, they'd call him something else entirely, if stories of justice, redemption, and the grit of the forgotten move you. Like, share, and subscribe to join us on this unforgettable ride through dust, fire, and unexpected grace. The wind arrived first, dry and low, like a warning hum through brittle sagebrush. Shallow Creek hadn't seen rain in weeks, and dust hung in the air like old gossip, clinging to boots, beards, and the corners of every cracked window pane. Inside, the dusty Spur Saloon, the air was thick with smoke, sweat, and indifference. It was just past sundown, and the regulars had already settled into their usual habits: cards slapped on sticky tables, laughter as hollow as their pockets, and whiskey, poured like it could drown out the weight of a man's sins. Then the doors opened. He didn't kick them wide like some brash gun hand. He didn't swagger in with the arrogance of a bounty hunter or the stink of desperation. He just entered, slow, deliberate, like a shadow that had decided to take shape. Black coat, black gloves, black hat. The only color on him was the glint of old silver buckles and the faint crimson tint on the stitching of his saddlebags, now slung over his shoulder like a cross to bear. His horse, tethered outside, was black too, sleek, too well fed for a traveler, with flanks that didn't twitch at the sound of laughter or the bark of a gunshot. This wasn't a man running from anything, and yet he carried the weight of something that never stopped following. He didn't speak, didn't nod, just stood there long enough for everyone to feel it, that silence that stilled even the piano player in the corner, his fingers pausing over the ivory keys. Then, slowly, the stranger moved toward the bar. "Whiskey?" asked the barkeep, voice cautious, wiping the counter that hadn't been clean in a decade. The man shook his head once, not rude, just final. "Water, then?" No answer. "Suit yourself." He took the seat nearest the back, facing the room. Back to the wall. Watching. Waiting. Like a man who expected something violent to arrive but wasn't worried about it. Not even a little. That's when it began. From the front of the saloon, a voice crackled through the heat, high-pitched, nasal, and soaked in the kind of greed that made skin crawl. "All right, gentlemen, we've got ourselves a rare sort of offering tonight." Heads turned. A woman stood there, early 40s maybe, dressed in a worn silk dress 2 decades out of fashion. Her name was Evelyn Tarse. Most folks in Shallow Creek called her Widow Tarse, though her late husband's death had raised more questions. Then tears. She'd married into the family of a rancher who died sudden last spring, leaving behind a small claim and 2 daughters not of her blood. The girls were with her now. Twins, small, maybe 9, maybe younger. Dirty feet, cheeks too thin, eyes too wide, hair unbrushed. They stood there barefoot, holding hands like it was all they had left. They didn't cry. Crying was for children who still believed someone might help. Strong girls. Widow Tarse declared, "Good with laundry, quick learners. They eat more than I can spare, and I've got no use for 'em now. I got a winter to survive and no husband to fetch wood or trade meat. So I'm offering 'em up. $50 takes the pair." There were laughs, mean ones, whispers, a cough. "You selling children now, Evelyn?" A voice mocked from the back. She didn't flinch. "Better than watching them starve. You want 'em alive, don't you? Or do y'all just want to sit and pretend this world's got rules anymore?" The sheriff, perched on a stool not far off, took a long swig of beer and stared at the ceiling like the peeling paint held answers. He said nothing. The preacher was there, too. Reverend Holt, white collar stained with dust and cowardice. He cleared his throat, murmured, "The Lord moves in mysterious ways," and turned his eyes toward the floor. The bidding started. 20, 25. A man near the poker table offered 30 and a bottle of whiskey. 40, 45. The stranger said nothing, not a blink. The girls didn't look around. They knew the game. Their shoulders had gone stiff like little soldiers. Their fingers squeezed tighter. One had a scar on her chin. The other had a bruise on her wrist. There was no mercy in this room. Not in Shallow Creek. Then, when the bidding reached 55 and silence settled like a dare, the stranger stood. A hush fell over the room again, thicker than before. He reached into his coat, slowly, no sudden moves, the kind of motion that made the sheriff shift uneasily, hand resting on his holster. But the man didn't draw iron. He pulled out a leather pouch, tossed it onto the table in front of Evelyn Tarse. It landed with a heavy thump, the sound of real silver, enough to make a drunk man sober. She opened it. Her eyes went wide. This is more than double. They're mine now, the saved stranger said. His voice was deep, calm, worn like sanded wood. No one moved. He turned to the girls, held out a hand. They hesitated. But slowly, the one with the scar stepped forward. The other followed. They each took one of his hands and he led them out, not like a man taking property, but like a father walking daughters to safety. The doors closed behind them. No one dared follow. For a while the room sat still like a church just after a thunderclap. Then the whispers began. Who is he? Never seen him before. Some say he's ex-Confederate. Others say he's a bounty killer who lost his own kids in the war. Or maybe he's just death with a conscience. Outside, the wind picked up. The stranger mounted his horse, lifting each girl gently into the saddle before him, one on each side. He didn't look back, didn't wave, just rode into the dying light like the end of a story no one understood yet. Inside the saloon, Evelyn Tarse counted her silver again, but 3 days later she'd be found bound and bruised in the root cellar behind her home. Mouth gagged, eyes wide with fear. No one knew who did it. The sheriff called it a robbery. The preacher called it divine punishment. And the girls, they were seen outside a cabin 3 miles east of town, fed clean, dressed in wool coats, fars too fine for orphans. The stranger had built a second bed, chopped enough firewood for a winter, taught them how to bait a fishing line and hush a rifle's echo. And still, no one knew his name. They crested the ridge just before nightfall, where the cottonwoods thinned and the stars came out early. The path was narrow, winding through dark trees like a forgotten trail drawn by a man who didn't care whether anyone followed. The air smelled of pine pitch, earth, and something softer, wood smoke from a cabin that had waited too long for the sound of children's voices. The stranger's horse moved steady beneath them, hooves quiet against the soil, as if it, too, understood the burden it carried. The girls didn't speak, not at first. They sat, one on either side of him, arms wrapped tight around his coat, faces turned to the sky like they weren't sure if they were being rescued or kidnapped by a ghost. It was the younger twin, by minutes but still the quieter one, who finally asked, "Where are we going?" He didn't look down. "Home," he said simply. The older one frowned. "Whose?" There was a pause. "Yours now," he answered, and that was the end of it. The cabin appeared around the bend, tucked beneath a rocky ledge and framed by 2 blackened pine trunks. One window shutter hung loose. The roof sagged a little at the edge as if too tired to hold up the weight of seasons past. But smoke curled from the stone chimney, and the door stood open. Inside, it was simple. One room with a rough planked floor and an iron stove that groaned with heat, a cot in the corner, a table, a single chair, and above the hearth a rusted horseshoe hung like a cross. He lifted the girls down one by one, their small boots crunching on the frost-bitten ground. They looked around, unsure. No lace curtains, no tea kettle, no sign of what little girls were meant to find in a place called home, but they followed him inside, because there was nowhere else to go. He moved without. Noise lighting a second lantern, stoking the fire, pulling a blanket from a cedar chest. Then, wordlessly, he laid out 2 bedrolls on the floor and pushed the cot to one side. They watched as he knelt and began hammering wood with practiced rhythm, measuring the distance between posts with only his eyes. Within an hour, the frame of a second bed stood in the middle of the room, raw and sturdy. He didn't smile, didn't praise himself, just worked. That night the girls fell asleep with their backs against the new headboard and a quilt up to their chins. The older one whispered stories to the younger about what their papa used to say, about how ghosts rode white horses, and how maybe this stranger wasn't a man at all, but a wish they made too many nights in the cold. The stranger sat at the table, staring into the fire, his coat still on, his hat low, listening, watching, waiting. Morning came with frost on the sill and the smell of beans and coffee. The girls woke slowly, blinking at the sunlight slanting through the window, soft and golden. There were tin cups on the table and a loaf of bread still warm. The stranger handed each girl a plate. Still no smile, still no questions. But the food was good. After breakfast, he handed them each a tin pail. "You fetch water from the creek," he said. "It's just down the hill. Don't go past the bend. Coyotes roam that far." The older girl nodded. The younger hesitated. "What if we get lost?" "You won't." "How do you know?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Because I don't lose things." And there was something in his voice that made even the trees outside lean in and listen. The girls obeyed. That day he showed them how to split kindling without slicing a finger, how to clean a fish, how to oil a saddle. He moved like a man who had once taught others, soldiers, maybe, or sons long buried. His hands were calloused but gentle. His words, when they came, were short, exact, and final. The girls didn't flinch when he raised his voice to warn them from the fire pit, didn't question when he gave each of them a carving knife and told them, "Learn to respect it, or it'll own you." That night, after they were fed and the fire burned low, he opened a box beneath the cot. Inside was a Bible, not the clean, leather-bound kind that sits untouched on a church podium. This one was frayed at the edges, pages yellowed, corners bent. A ribbon marked a passage, worn so smooth you'd think it had been thumbed 1,000 times in silence. He sat beside them, opened the book, and read, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not." His voice was steady but distant, like a man reading not to teach, but to remember. The girls leaned against him without asking. It was the first time they had touched him without fear. By the end of the week, the cabin no longer echoed with loneliness. A string of wildflowers dried on the windowsill. A wooden whistle, carved by the older twin, sat on the table. They had names again, spoken aloud, without shame. The older girl was Ella, the younger, May. No one had said their names in weeks. No one had cared to ask. And still, the man never told them his. Ella asked once, while helping him trap a raccoon that had been stealing from the stores, "Mister, what should we call you?" He didn't look up. "Doesn't matter. But we gotta call you something." He paused, wiped the blade of his knife on his sleeve. "Call me what you want, just don't lie." May tilted her head. "Were you a sheriff once?" "No." "A preacher?" "No." "A killer?" He didn't answer, and in that silence Ella said softly, "You don't scare us." He looked at her then, something soft behind his eyes for just a moment. Then it vanished. "You should." On the 10th day, 3 men arrived. They came from the north, riding hard and dust-covered. Their coats had mining company insignias sewn on, their boots too polished for the hills. They didn't stop at the saloon, didn't speak to the sheriff. Rode straight through to the pines. One of them, a big man with yellow teeth and a whip at his side, claimed he had papers. Purchase rights, he called them. For goods. The sheriff didn't care. The stranger didn't wait. He was outside. The cabin before the first horse dismounted. "You're trespassing," he said. The men looked at him, saw the rifle cradled in his arms. One chuckled. "Look, fella, we ain't here to make trouble. Just came to collect what's ours." "They're not yours." The tallest man stepped forward. They were sold. Proper. Witnesses in town. Doesn't matter. Look, you can keep one. Call it charity. But the other, we got a buyer in Carson who'll pay good coin. Ain't personal." The stranger's voice was quiet. "It will be." They laughed. Then he fired. The first shot took the tall man through the neck. The second dropped. The one with the whip before his gun even cleared the holster. The last man ran. Made it to his horse. Thought he was free. He wasn't. The stranger didn't chase. Just walked back inside. Slow, calm, the way he always moved. That night the fire burned hotter. Ella asked what happened. May clung to his arm. He didn't answer. But in the morning 3 new mounds of dirt lay on the ridge behind the cabin, marked with stones, named with silence, and no one came looking for the girls again. By dawn, the earth had hardened over the graves. No names. Just 3 flat stones, set with care, side by side. The girls watched from the window while the stranger stacked kindling in the stove, as if the weight of 3 deaths hadn't added a thing to his soul. The sky outside had turned a soft amber, and a few crows circled low, as if sensing change in the hills. Ella whispered, "Should we say a prayer?" May nodded slowly, hugging her knees, "like we did for Papa." The stranger didn't turn around, but his voice broke the quiet. No prayer ever made a man better than what he chose. Still, that afternoon, he took the Bible from the shelf and laid it open near the hearth. The pages fluttered until they stopped on a verse about judgment. And peace, he left it there. Said nothing else. That night the girls didn't ask what would happen if more men came. They already knew. The town of Shallow Creek had a memory as long as its thirst. By the end of the week, stories crawled through the saloon like rats in the walls. Some said the stranger was a hired killer from Missouri, brought west by railroad men and double-crossed into solitude. Others claimed he was a ghost, shot through the heart in some war and walking ever since, dragging unfinished business behind him like a busted saddle. But the truth never came from the preacher, who locked his doors after sunset, or from the sheriff, who began drinking before noon, or from Evelyn Tarse, who kept her head down and her mouth shut, bruises still blooming under her collar. No one rode out to that cabin, not any more. Once the sheriff sent a deputy halfway. The boy came back pale, said he heard gunshots before he hit the creek. The next day he resigned and left town. Still, the stories grew. Children whispered of a man who drank no whiskey, took no name, and raised 2 little girls on bear meat and ghost stories. Women, more quietly, wondered what kind of man would walk into hell for daughters that weren't his. And one afternoon, old Silas Baird, half-blind and 2/3 drunk, declared to a poker table, "That man's settin' roots. Down. You watch. Ain't just protectin' him. He's becomin' something." "What?" asked a young ranch hand, half amused. Silas leaned in, eyes rimmed red. "A father. Spring threatened early. The snow melted fast that year, running off the ridges like the land itself wanted to wash away its sins. Down by the creek, green pushed through the banks, and in the field near the cabin the stranger was digging again, this time not graves but garden beds. Ella helped. May painted rocks. With ash and water, marking rows for beans and squash, they planted sunflower seeds around the edge of the cabin, and the stranger said nothing when the girls decided to name each one after animals: bear, fox, owl, rabbit. He built a fence from fallen pine, repaired the roof with hand-split shingles, taught Ella to fire a rifle, and May to throw a knife straight enough to scare a raccoon stiff. Every evening they read from the Bible, not out loud, not always. Sometimes they just sat near it, heads bowed, eyes closed. When May asked if he believed in God, the stranger looked out the window for a long time. "I believe in debt," he said. "What kind?" "The kind you spend your life paying, even if no one ever comes to collect." May didn't understand, but Ella did. One Sunday a rider came, not one of the company men, not a bounty or thug, Just a lean fellow in preacher's black, with a coat too big and a hunger in his eyes not fed by food. He called himself Father Giles, claimed he was sent by the Church of Second Promise in Silver Ridge, said he'd heard rumors of 2 orphan girls taken by a fallen guardian, and he was here to offer spiritual custody. The stranger didn't argue. He offered the man water, listened to his sermon, even nodded once or twice. Then, as the preacher stood to leave, with a hand resting on Ella's shoulder like he already owned her, the stranger said, quiet as wind, "You're not here for their souls." Father Giles stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You're here because you think no one will fight you for them," the preacher drew back. "I came with a letter of appointment. I came with a shovel and 3 fresh graves. You want to join them?" Father Giles rode back to Silver Ridge that night, and no preacher returned again. One evening, as summer stretched lazy over the hills and the creek ran low with warmth, Ella found the stranger cleaning his rifle beside the fire. She sat beside him, knees pulled up, arms folded. "You ever have a family?" The stranger didn't look up. "Yes." "What happened?" He paused, ran a cloth along the barrel. "They died." "Because of you?" Another pause. "Yes." Ella didn't speak, just stared into the fire. Then, quietly, "Are we making up for it?" His hand stilled. He looked at her then, not like a man answering a child, but like someone speaking to the only truth left in the world. "No, you're not my atonement." "Then why?" "Because someone should have stopped it before it got to you. Someone should have done better. And now you're that someone?" He didn't answer, but Ella didn't press. Sometimes silence was the only kind of love a man like that knew how to give. By midsummer, May had a birthday, her 10th, though no one knew for sure. They marked it with fresh cornbread and a pie made from stolen apples. The stranger gave her a journal, hand-stitched from scrap leather, and a pencil whittled from a twig. He didn't say, "Happy birthday." He just placed it in her hands and nodded once. That night she wrote her first words. "My name is May. I live in a cabin now. It's not big, but it's ours. There are trees and a garden, and a man who doesn't talk much, but who makes me feel safe. I think maybe he's not just saving us. I think maybe we're saving him too." She hid the journal under the floorboard where her old shoes used to rest. She didn't need them anymore. They weren't running now. They were staying. The first sign of trouble wasn't the smoke. It was the silence. Not the kind that blanketed the pines in winter or the hush that followed a bedtime prayer. This was different. Like the birds knew something was coming and flew the other way. Like even the wind had stopped to listen. It was late afternoon. The sun hung low behind the hills, painting the fields in copper. May was stringing a line of wildflowers along the garden posts. Ella was kneeling by the creek, teaching herself how to skip stones farther than the bend. The stranger was on the roof, mending a broken shingle. Then he stopped, stood still, and listened. Down the ridge in the far dust where the trail met the tree line, a figure appeared, riding slow, alone, not in a rush, not hiding either. That made him dangerous. The stranger climbed down from the roof without a word, picked up his rifle, loaded it, smooth and quiet. Ella stood. "Someone coming?" He nodded once. "Go inside. Take your sister. Close the shutters." "But—" He didn't raise his voice. "Now." Ella obeyed. By the time the rider reached the edge of the clearing, the stranger was waiting. Boots planted in front of the cabin, rifle slung but ready. The rider dismounted. Tall, dusty, tan coat, duster style. Spurs that jingled just enough to say he didn't sneak up on folks. His face was lean, weathered, like someone who'd smiled once, a long time ago, and regretted it since. He wore a pistol low on his hip, like it was born there. "Evenin'," the man said, voice smooth as varnished wood. "Not interested," the stranger replied. The man chuckled. "Don't even know what I'm selling. Don't care." The man raised both hands, palms open, friendly. "Ain't here to start trouble. Name's Seth Durant. Folks call me Durant from Calico Bluff." "I don't." "Well, that's a shame," Durant said, stepping slowly forward. "See, I heard a story, a good one, about a man up in the pines who took in a pair of twins. bought 'em out of a saloon like a sack of grain, and now raising 'em up like they were his own. That true?" The stranger didn't move. Durant smiled. "'Cause if it is, I got news for you. Those girls, they got blood." The rifle didn't twitch. Durant continued. "Their real mama? She's still breathing. Barely. Down south, near Santa Ynez. Been asking around. Wants 'em back." The stranger said nothing. "Course," Durant added, "she ain't got money, ain't got strength. But she asked me to find her girls. Said she made a mistake, leaving 'em with her husband's kin. Didn't know they'd get sold off like goats." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "And you're what? Her guardian angel?" Durant smirked. "Something like that. I find things, I return things, and I get paid along the way. If not by her, then maybe by the newspapers, or some fancy lawyer who likes stories with sad little girls and mysterious men who bury folks in the woods." Silence. "Tell you what," Durant said, leaning back against the hitch post. "I ain't looking to fight. You hand over the girls, I ride south. They see their real mother, get their names back. Maybe a judge makes it official." Still no answer. Durant shrugged. "Or you don't. And I find someone who makes you listen." He pushed off the post. The rifle moved. Durant stopped cold. "I buried 3 men on this land," the stranger said. His voice didn't rise, didn't shake. "And I won't lose sleep if there's a 4th. Durant held up both hands again, backing slowly toward his horse. "No need for blood, friend. Just passing along a message. I'll be staying a few days in Shallow Creek, maybe visit that fine preacher, maybe stir up some paperwork. I reckon I'll be hearing from you." He mounted, turned his horse, and rode slow back the way he came. The stranger watched until he was gone, then turned. The girls were waiting at the door. That night, thunder rolled in. No rain, just sound. Heavy, distant, like a drum beat that hadn't reached them yet. The stranger sat at the table, gun disassembled, cleaning it with a cloth that smelled of oil and war. Ella paced. May sat on the bed, arms around her legs. "Is he really from Mama?" May asked. The stranger didn't answer. "I mean, our real Mama, is she alive?" He set the rifle down, looked at them both. "Do you remember her?" Ella nodded, slow. "A little. She used to sing before she got sick. Papa said she went to the hills to rest. Never came back." "She didn't want to leave us," May whispered. "No," the stranger said. "She didn't." "Then why didn't she come sooner?" Ella asked. He didn't have an answer, but he reached into the cedar chest and pulled out 2 old handkerchiefs, faded but embroidered with their names. "These were in the pouch when I bought you. Not much else." May took hers, held it like a holy relic. Ella asked, "What if she is alive?" The stranger looked into the fire. "Then she's late." In Shallow Creek, Durant stirred things up fast. He visited the sheriff first, slid a few coins across the desk, asked about legal custody, asked about the mother, asked about land records, guardianship laws, and bounty notices. Then he went to the preacher, and there his story changed. "She's real sick," he told Reverend Holt. "Wants to see her girls before she goes. She regrets everything. She's got a Bible marked with their names. Wants to make peace with the Lord." The preacher, wary but desperate for redemption, offered to help. Durant smiled. Next, Durant spoke to Widow Tarse, slid her more silver, promised her the church's protection, maybe a reward, told her it wasn't too late to make things right. By sundown, half the town was buzzing, not about the stranger, but about the girls, and by week's end, Durant filed a petition in the county office in Del Rio, a petition for the return and rightful custody of Ella and May Cartwright minors. The hearing was set for 2 weeks' time, and the man who had protected them for months would be forced to appear, or lose them. Back at the cabin, the stranger read the letter twice, once silently, once aloud, then folded it, placed it in the stove, and lit the fire. Ella watched it burn. "What are we going to do?" The stranger stared into the flames. "Whatever it takes." May touched his arm. "We don't want to go." He didn't move. "You hear me?" she said, louder now. "We don't want another family. We don't care about judges or real mamas or anybody else. He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw it in his face. Not rage, not fear. Loss, not fresh, but deep, old, unhealed. He knelt before them both, one hand on each of their shoulders. "I'm not going to let anyone take you." Ella swallowed hard. "Even if they try?" He nodded once. Even then, the storm broke after midnight. Rain poured hard against the roof, and lightning lit the ridge. But inside the cabin, the three of them sat close, firelight dancing on the walls, together, unshaken and ready. The rain stopped 2 days later, but the tension didn't. Out in the hills, the land steamed under the returning sun, and everything smelled of pine and gun oil. The creek swelled, tracks were washed clean, but some things couldn't be buried, like the memory of a man named Durant still stirring up the ghosts of Shallow Creek. The stranger hadn't left the cabin. He rose before the sun, sharpened blades, cleaned the horseshoes, watched the tree line. He taught Ella how to check for fresh boot prints in the mud, taught May how to tell a hawk's cry from a warning shout. By noon each day, they practiced with slingshots and rifles, knives and instinct, because war didn't always come with flags. Sometimes it came dressed in law. In town, Durant had made himself comfortable. He drank in the saloon like a preacher at communion, gracious, generous, pretending not to listen to the talk around him. But he always did. He kept a notebook in his coat where he jotted down names. People who could be bought, people who might testify, people who still called Ella and May orphans instead of Cartwrights. He paid a boy to carry a letter to Del Rio, a judge, named Halverson, known for siding with blood over bonds. He bought Widow Tarse a new shawl, then gently suggested she sign an affidavit saying she'd entrusted the girls to a drifter with no name or papers. She didn't hesitate. Fear makes people obedient. He left coins on the church pew after Sunday service and shook Reverend Holt's hand for too long. "It's the right thing," Durant whispered. "It's God's will they go back to their mother." The preacher didn't meet his eye. He just nodded and told himself it was out of his hands. By the 5th day, the stranger came to town. Alone. No warning, no noise. Just rode in slow, covered in trail dust, like a storm walking on 2 legs. He tied his horse near the sheriff's office and stepped inside. Sheriff Coulter was dozing behind his desk, boots up, badge tilted sideways. He woke with a start. "Well, I need a name," the stranger said. "What?" "The judge. The one who filed the petition. I need his name and his location." Coulter blinked. "Now hold on a minute." The stranger set something down on the desk. A bullet. Then another, then a third. Laid out like punctuation. "I buried 3 men for coming near those girls. This man's doing worse. He's trying to own them from a distance." Coulter swallowed. "Judge Halverson. Del Rio." The stranger picked up the bullets and turned to leave. "Wait," the sheriff called. "You can't just go shooting judges." The stranger stopped in the doorway. "I won't shoot him, not if he listens. And if he doesn't?" He looked back, eyes like carved stone. "Then I'll bury what's left of the law beside those 3 fools in the hills." Then he left. Ella and May waited on the porch when he returned. They didn't ask what he learned. They just watched him oil the saddle and load the saddlebags with food, ammo, and something wrapped in wax cloth. Ella finally asked, "Where are you going?" "To Del Rio." "When?" "Tonight." She stood there a moment, then said, "We want to come." "No." But he turned, not angry, just firm. "If something happens to me, you stay hidden. You survive. You hear me?" May's eyes welled. "We don't want to survive. We want you." He knelt then, pulled them both close. The closest thing to an embrace they'd ever gotten from him. His hands were rough. His breath smelled like pine sap and ash. "You made me a man again," he said quietly. "But I've got to finish this, so you can be girls again." They didn't understand fully, but they let go. That night after supper, he laid a map on the table, showed them how to follow the creek to the trading post if he didn't come back, gave them the pouch of silver, gave them his Bible. Then he saddled. Up and rode into the dark. Del Rio was a cleaner town than Shallow Creek, but it stank worse. Men wore suits here, had titles, drank their whiskey from crystal. But their eyes were meaner, and their hands shook more when counting bills. The courthouse was a brick building near the rail line, guarded by men who smiled at bribes. The stranger arrived at dawn. He left his horse tied 2 blocks down and walked in alone, unarmed, visible, eyes sharp. He found Judge Halverson sipping coffee behind a wide desk, reading a file marked Cartwright, custody petition. The stranger sat without asking. The judge looked up. Sir, you are protector of the girls you're about to sign away. Halverson adjusted his glasses. Do you have a name? No. The judge frowned. Then I can't help you. You're not on record. According to the petitioner, the girls were removed from the care of their lawful guardian. They were sold, the stranger said. Halverson blinked. In a saloon. For silver. I paid. Not for property. For freedom. The judge leaned back. Do you have witnesses? Yes. The whole damn town. Then why has no one spoken for you? The stranger stood slowly, pulled something from his coat. Not a weapon. Handkerchief, 2 of them. Faded. Embroidered. He placed them on the desk. They had names before they had scars. The judge stared at the cloth, then up at the man. What are you hoping for? A delay, a chance to prove their mother's alive, that she wants them, not some hired liar. The judge considered, then nodded once. You have 5 days. He left the office with 5 days to spare and no trail to follow until he saw the telegram office, and inside a wire pinned to the board. From Santa Ynez Clinic to Durant, Calico Bluff. Subject, patient Cartwright. Condition, worsening. No family. Present. Awaiting transfer. The stranger didn't wait. He bought a train ticket south. Didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't stop moving until he found her. She was thinner than the girls. Same eyes, same curve in the cheekbone. Her skin was paper, her breath shallow, but she opened her eyes when he said their names. Ella May. A tear slipped sideways. She tried to sit up. Failed. He held her hand. She gripped back. She doesn't. No, she whispered. Who? My sister, Evelyn. She said she'd care for them. She sold them. More tears. I was sick. I thought I'd die. You almost did. He stood. You're coming with me. I can't. Walk. I'll carry you. And he did. Onto the train. Back to Del Rio. Back to the judge. And 5 days later, the petition was withdrawn. Durant left town. No goodbyes, no payment, just dust behind him. 1 week later, the stranger returned to the cabin, riding slow and behind. Him, a second horse, pulling a small wagon. Inside it, a woman wrapped in blankets, her eyes tired. But warm, Ella and May ran to her, fell to their knees, sobbed into her arms. The stranger dismounted, watched, then turned to enter the cabin. But May ran to him, grabbed his hand. Don't go. I'm not. Then what are you? He looked down, and, for the first time, he smiled. I'm home. The hills were quiet again. Too quiet, the stranger thought, as he stood outside the cabin watching the smoke curl from the chimney. It wasn't the uneasy kind of silence, the kind that warned of thunder or riders or the rattle of trouble, but a softer silence like the land had been holding its breath and was finally learning to exhale. Inside, Ella and May were helping their mother settle in. Her name, Caroline, they now remembered, was being spoken like a spell that needed practice. She moved slow, but with growing strength, voice still fragile, but hands eager. The girls clung to her like ivy to stone. The stranger watched them. Through the window for a long while, arms folded, his back to the pines. He should have felt peace, but peace never stayed long with men like him. He'd seen it before, in the war, in the mining camps. In the eyes of men who thought burying a past meant it wouldn't dig its way back up. The sun dipped behind the ridge, and in its place came hooves. He heard them first. 3 riders, not fast, but purposeful. not lost. He moved to the edge of the porch, rifle slung low, hand resting on the grip like it had always belonged there. The girls didn't notice, but Caroline did. She turned her head toward the door, voice barely a whisper. "Is it them?" The stranger didn't answer, because he didn't know who them was yet, but part of him already suspected. They crested the hill just before dusk, three shapes against a blood-orange sky. Two were rough-looking mercenary types, the kind that carried knives for quiet work and walked like they'd buried more than they'd confessed. The third was a lean man with silver hair tucked beneath a flat-crowned hat. His coat was black, but the embroidery shimmered faint gold when the sun hit it just right. The stranger recognized him the way a wounded man recognizes pain, Silas Creed. Once a major in the Confederate cavalry, then a captain of bushwhackers, then a dealer of debts, moral, financial, or otherwise. Now something worse. He rode in like a ghost that had remembered a name. "Well, I'll be," Creed said, swinging down from the saddle. "I half expected to find a grave with your name on it. Looks like you done something unexpected. Lived." The stranger said nothing. Creed grinned. "Still don't talk much, huh? You were the same back when we burned those trains outside Murfreesboro. Always did your work quiet. But hell, if you didn't make a statement." The girls had stepped onto the porch now. Caroline stood behind them, hand braced on the doorway. Creed looked at the cabin, then back at the stranger. "Didn't think you were the family type." The stranger's voice cut low and flat. "You're not here by accident." "No," Creed said, "I ain't." He reached into his coat, not for a gun, but for a small roll of parchment. "Got a ledger here, handwritten, sealed in Richmond. Says you owe me $600 and a favor that was never cashed." The stranger didn't move. Creed unrolled the parchment. Let the evening wind flap it against his fingers. $600 for that mess you made in Georgia. Remember that? You pulled us out 2 hours before the Union arrived. Cost us 2 men, 3 wagons, and a bank vault we never opened. That was 10 years ago, Creed grinned. Time don't make debts disappear. You know that. What's the favor? Creed stepped closer. I got a man in Yuma needs disappearing, and I want the girls. The stranger's grip tightened on the rifle. Creed held up a hand. Not like that. Relax. Just for leverage. You go to Yuma, handle my business, you get 'em back. Safe. No scars. No. Creed raised an eyebrow. You sure? Because right. Now, they're your weak spot, your only spot. All I need is 1 midnight ride and no sheriff will stop me. The rifle came up. Creed's men drew iron. But too late, because the stranger already had the hammer back and Creed square in his sights. You ain't taking them, he said. Creed didn't blink. Then what, friend? You gonna shoot me in front of your little family? Let them see what kind of man you really are? No, said the stranger. They already know. He fired. The shot echoed through the hills like thunder ripping the clouds apart. Creed went down, bullet in the leg. He screamed, twisted, tried to reach his pistol. The stranger fired again. Creed's hand exploded in red. The other 2 men froze. Leave him, the stranger said. One hesitated. The stranger cocked the rifle again. They rode off, didn't look back. The girls stared, wide-eyed. Carolyn held her breath. The stranger stepped forward, rifle still smoking, and looked down at Creed. Debts paid. Creed coughed blood. You're gonna die alone, he hissed. The stranger knelt beside him. No, I already did. He stood, turned, and didn't look back as Creed wept into the dust. That night, the cabin was quiet again, too quiet. Ella finally asked, Who was he? No one, the stranger said. Caroline sat beside him on the porch while the girls slept. You were part of something dark, weren't you? He nodded. I've seen it, she said. In your eyes, in the way you carry your silence. He said nothing. She took his hand. I don't care what you were. I see what you are. He looked at her then, and for once she didn't flinch. You didn't just save my daughters, she said. You gave them back to me. I could never repay that. You already did, he said. How? You believed me." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that doesn't belong to lovers or strangers, but something older, deeper, something like grace. At dawn the stranger saddled his horse, not to leave, but to ride to town. He needed lumber, nails, paint, because the cabin was no longer his refuge. It was their home, and this time he'd build it right. The days that followed passed in quiet rhythm, like a song remembered after too long in the dark. The cabin took on new light, literally. The stranger returned from town with panes of glass wrapped in burlap, enough to replace the old shutters, and let in morning sun. He brought back nails, hinges, even paint. Blue, the girl's favorite, though he never asked what color they wanted. They painted the window sills and the trim. Caroline watched from a rocking chair on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, her cheeks gaining color again. She no longer coughed through the night. Her steps grew stronger. She cooked more, scolding Ella gently when she added too much salt, and laughing when May accidentally dropped flour on the dog the stranger hadn't admitted was his. It was peace, real peace, which is why it scared him, because peace doesn't visit a man like him without asking what it wants in return. One morning, as mist still curled around the pines and the sun was only a suggestion behind the hills, he sat by the fire carving a block of cedar. His hands worked slow but sure, smoothing corners, shaping lines. May appeared beside him without a sound, her hair tangled from sleep. "What you making?" He didn't look up. "Box." "For what?" "Memories." She sat beside him, watching. "The blade work. I've been thinking," she said softly. "You don't got a name." "I do." "Well, you never told us." He said nothing. She waited a while, then asked, "Is it something bad?" "No." "Then why won't you share it?" He stopped carving, set the blade down. "When a man leaves something behind," he said, "sometimes it's best not to call it back." May tilted her head. "But that name ain't bad to us. We just want something to call you." She stood then, brushing her nightdress off, and padded to the door. Halfway there she turned. "What if we gave you a new one?" He looked at her. Her eyes didn't flinch. The silence between them lasted several heartbeats. Then he said, "What would it be?" She grinned. "I'll ask Ella." By breakfast the girls were whispering like it was a secret plan. Caroline watched them, smiling, over a skillet of cornbread. She looked up at the stranger across the table. "You know they're serious." He nodded. "You okay with that?" He didn't answer right away, just sipped his coffee. Then, finally, "If they need a name to keep me, they can choose one." Caroline studied him. "You think you don't deserve to be theirs, don't you?" His eyes stayed on the window. "I think I wasn't meant to have peace." She reached over, placed her hand on his. "You don't find peace, you make it, one day at a time." He didn't speak, but he didn't move his hand away either. That afternoon, the girls disappeared into the woods behind the cabin, armed with sticks, ink, and a length of rope. The stranger followed quietly, 100 paces back, keeping watch. Without revealing himself, he saw them set up a circle of stones, draw lines in the dirt, rituals, he guessed, sacred and serious in the way only children can invent. That night, after dinner, they called him to the porch. Caroline stood beside them, her face lit by lantern glow. "May, step forward." "We made a decision." Ella nodded. "You need a name." The stranger waited. Ella lifted a folded paper, pressed it into his hand. He opened it slowly. Inside, written in careful block letters, was a single word, "Pa." Underneath it, "If you want it." His throat clenched, not from pain, not from fear, but from the kind of feeling a man forgets he's capable of. "You don't have to," Ella added quickly. "We just figured you earned it, and we needed something real to call you, not Mr. or Sir or Hey." May whispered, "You already feel like it anyway." He looked at them, at their bare feet, dirt-smudged cheeks, hopeful eyes, then at Caroline, who smiled, quiet and steady, as if she knew. This moment had been coming since the day he first walked them out of that saloon. He swallowed hard, then nodded once. "All right," he said. "Pa's fine." They cheered like it was Christmas, threw their arms around him. Even Carolyn reached out and drew him into the light, into the warmth, into the family he'd spent a lifetime believing he didn't deserve. That night, Ella wrote, "In her journal today, we gave him a name, but I think he gave us something bigger, a real father, the kind who watches the trees before trouble shows, the kind who teaches you how to shoot and how to read the sky and how to live without being afraid of being left. We call him Pa now, and it fits." The next few weeks passed slow and golden. They built a new table, large enough for 4, planted corn, hung a wind chime from the porch made from old bullet casings and horseshoe nails, and when Caroline began walking farther into the woods without tiring, the stranger knew he'd done what he came to do, not just protect, not just rescue, but restore. One night, as the stars burned bright and low, and the girls slept soundly in their new room, a room with curtains and drawings and shelves made of pine, he sat with Caroline on the porch, watching moths flicker through the lantern light. She leaned against him. "You thinking about leaving?" Again he shook his head. "No." "Then what's on your mind?" He hesitated, then softly, "What if peace is the trap?" She turned her head. "It's not. It always felt like one. That's because the world taught you to expect pain. But this?" She gestured to the cabin, to the trees, to the hush of their children sleeping safe. "This is what you built. You didn't fall into it. You earned it." He let that sit, let it breathe, then nodded. "You think they'll keep calling me Pa?" "They'll never call you anything else." He looked out at the woods. The wind moved gently through the branches, and for the first time in years, maybe his whole life, he didn't reach for the rifle at his side. He just listened to the silence, to the peace, to the sound of home. Spring came like an apology. The hills burst into bloom almost overnight. Lilac, Indian paintbrush, soft white blossoms drifting across the fields like promises too long withheld. The creek ran clean again, and Ella and May spent their mornings barefoot in the grass, chasing frogs and filling baskets with wildflowers for their mother. Caroline was baking again, bread mostly, the kind that made the whole cabin smell like home long before the first slice was cut. The stranger, Pa, as he was now called without pause or hesitation, kept to his habits. He chopped wood before sunrise, checked the traps, walked the ridge, with a rifle slung across his shoulder. Not because he expected trouble, but because he'd learned long ago. When you stop watching, the past finds you. And it did, but not the way he expected. It was a Tuesday when the man came. No thunder, no dust, no warning, just a knock at the cabin door. Ella was inside, polishing the rifle her father had taught her to clean. May was outside brushing the mule. Carolyn was pulling loaves from the fire-warmed oven, humming an old lullaby that no one had heard her sing until recently. And the stranger, Pa, wasn't home. He'd ridden to town to collect nails and salt. So the knock fell to Ella. She opened the door with the barrel pointed low, just as she'd been taught. The man standing there wasn't what she expected. He was tall, clean-shaven, with a pressed coat and soft leather gloves. His boots didn't show trail wear. His hat was fine felt, with a feather tucked into the band. His face was young, smooth, and calm, too calm. He smiled. "Afternoon, miss," he said, removing his hat with a courteous nod. "I'm looking for the Cartwright family. I believe I've found them." Ella didn't answer. May came up behind her, froze when she saw him. Caroline stepped to the door then, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Caroline Cartwright," she said evenly. "And these are my daughters." The man's smile widened. "Well then, we're halfway home already." "Name's Preston Wiles. I'm a friend of your late husband's. Caleb, right? I used to ride with him back in the early days. Real shame what happened." Carolyn narrowed her eyes. "I've never heard of you." "That's not surprising," he replied smoothly. "We fell out of touch before the girls were born, but I came as soon as I heard what you've been through. Thought maybe I could help." "Help?" Ella asked. Preston turned toward her. "I work with the Children's Resettlement Bureau," he said. "Small branch, faith-funded. We place children orphaned by war, illness, or circumstance with families in better-positioned towns. Good people, gentle homes. We already have a home," May said. The smile didn't fade, but his eyes sharpened. "Course you do, but that doesn't mean it can't be improved. Your mother—" He nodded toward Caroline. "She's recovering, yes. But what if she can't stay well? What happens if your guardian vanishes?" "He's not just a guardian," Ella snapped. "He's our father." Preston gave a soft chuckle. "Not legally, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, curdled. The air. Caroline's face had gone pale. "I think you should leave," she said. Preston sighed. "I didn't come to fight. I came to offer options. I brought papers, you see, ones that show concern has been raised, that maybe, just maybe, the girls are in a dangerous situation, unregulated, unsupervised, taught to shoot, to hunt, exposed to violence. No one's taking them," Caroline said firmly. Preston stepped back, raised his hands. "Not today, just delivering a message." "What kind of message?" He touched the brim of his hat. "One that says, 'We're watching now.'" Then he walked back to his horse and rode off without looking back. The stranger returned an hour later. He found Caroline chopping wood like it was the only thing holding her together. The girls were quiet, May curled in a corner with her journal, Ella cleaning the rifle again over and over, metal already gleaming. He listened to all of it, then asked one question. "What did he say his name was?" Caroline told him. "Preston O. Wiles." The stranger didn't react, but something shifted behind his eyes. That night he sat alone by the fire, the ledger open on the table. Not the Bible. The old leather journal he kept locked under the floorboards. Names, towns, debts, warnings. He found it. Wiles Preston. Traveled with consular agents 1873-1874. Blackwood County scandal. 2 girls gone missing. Case buried. Judge bought. Church buried the rest. He closed the book and sat in the dark a long time. The next morning he saddled his horse. Caroline met him on the porch. "You going after him?" "Yes." She didn't argue, but her voice broke a little when she asked, "Will you come back?" He looked at her, touched her hand. "I always come back. You didn't used to. I do now." He kissed her forehead, then rode out. Preston Wiles hadn't gone far. He'd rented a room above the saloon in Shallow Creek, where he took breakfast in the finest chair and treated the bartender like a servant. When the stranger walked in, there were no warnings, just the creak of the door and the silence that followed. Wiles stood slowly, smiling. I was wondering when the infamous shadow would step into the light. The stranger didn't speak. "Do you deny you've kept them?" "Illegally?" Wiles asked. "Do you deny your violent history, your refusal to adopt through proper channels?" The stranger drew his knife. Not his gun, just the knife, and laid it on the table. Wiles stopped smiling. The stranger spoke, voice low. "You come. Near them again. I won't bury you. I'll carve your name into the rocks on the ridge so the coyotes know where to spit." "You'd threaten a state official?" "I'd gut a fox to protect what's mine." "What makes you think you're any different?" Wiles paled. "Fine," he said, voice trembling. "You've made your point, but others are watching now. I'm not the only one who wants to know how a ghost ended up raising children like they're his own." The stranger stepped closer. "I'm not a ghost," he said. "I'm what ghosts fear." Then he turned and left. He didn't look back. Didn't need to, because back at the cabin 2 girls were waiting with letters they'd written in crayon. One said, "To Pa, don't let the bad man take us. We like you better. We love you most." The other read, "We already chose you. That means no one else gets to." He folded the letters into the cedar box, placed it on the mantel, and from that night on, he never watched the woods in fear again, only in love. The news came on the back of a wagon, literally. A young farmhand driving a buckboard from Del Rio dropped off a notice wrapped in twine and dust, addressed to Caroline Cartwright, her guardian. The letterhead read, County Review of Guardianship Status, Shallow Creek District. Beneath it, printed in stiff, smug ink, were 5 words that made Caroline's stomach turn. Public inquiry, open to witnesses. The hearing was scheduled for 10 days out. Location, the church hall in Shallow Creek. The subject, whether the girls had been unlawfully removed from kin and placed in a home deemed extra-legal and potentially unsuitable for minors of delicate age. The author of the notice was listed plainly at the bottom, Preston Wiles. Special Investigator. Carolyn read the letter twice, then handed it to the stranger. He didn't curse, didn't sigh. He just stared at the page like it was a riddle someone had carved into stone and dared him to answer. At supper, Ella and May ate quietly, too quietly. The stranger watched them both, watched the way Ella's shoulders had tensed, watched the way May pushed her food around the plate, not eating. Say it, he said softly. May looked up. They want to take us. Ella's voice came sharper. They want to humiliate you. I don't care about that, he said. We do, Carolyn murmured. He looked at them, these 3 women who had somehow taken root in the soil of his soul. He'd killed men for less than what Wiles was doing, but this wasn't a gunfight. It was something worse, a room full of people, words and judgment. The next day the stranger rode into town and stood in front of the church hall. He stared at the building like it was a gallows. Inside, Reverend Holt was preparing pews for the upcoming inquiry, arranging folding chairs for those who'd come to observe. Preacher, the stranger said as he stepped through the doorway. Holt nearly dropped a hymnal. Lord above, you move quiet as sin. I need your pulpit, the stranger said, for 10 minutes. What for? I'm going to speak. Holt blinked. You? The stranger nodded. The preacher stared, then laughed once, a nervous bark. You sure about that? You ain't exactly known for sermons. I'm not preaching. I'm telling the truth. Holt sobered. You planning to threaten the county? No. Well, all right then, Holt said. But I'll pray for the roof. It ain't used to lightning. From men like you. The girls practiced for the hearing in their own way. Ella cleaned her shoes and brushed her hair like Ma taught her, standing tall in front of the mirror, hands by her sides, voice calm. They'll ask why we call him Pa, she said. Then, we tell them, May replied, because he is. What if they don't believe us? Ella glanced toward the window, where the stranger stood outside, splitting wood in his slow, sure way. They will, she whispered. May opened her journal that night and wrote, We weren't rescued by a man with a badge. We were rescued by a man with silence. That's what made it real. He didn't promise us anything. He just stayed. And stayed. And stayed. She tore the page out, folded it, slipped it into her dress pocket for the day they would make them prove. You're it. The hall was packed when they arrived, every bench taken. Men in dusty boots, women with scarves wrapped tight around their heads. Even Widow Tarse sat stiffly in the back, arms crossed, jaw tight. The sheriff watched from a corner, not in uniform. Reverend Holt stood at the front near the altar, uncomfortable in his role as court host. Preston Wiles sat to one side of the stage, flanked by 2 traveling clerks with briefcases and slicked hair. Caroline entered first, flanked by her daughters. Thea, stranger, came last, and when he stepped into the hall, it was as if someone had opened the back of the world and let the wind in. The place went silent. Every eye turned, and still he walked, hat in hand, boots clean, shirt tucked, unarmed. But every step carried the weight of 10 years buried deep. Wiles stood. Ladies and gentlemen, this inquiry is hereby opened. We are gathered today. I'll speak first, the stranger said. His voice carried through the hall like thunder, drawn out long and low. Wiles blinked. You aren't listed as counsel or family. I'm both, he replied. The preacher stepped forward. Let him talk. Wiles hesitated, then sat. The stranger walked to the front of the room and turned to face them all. He held no notes, no books, nothing but the truth. And when he spoke, it came out slow but steady. I wasn't raised to speak to crowds, and I've spent most of my life earning the silence I carry, but I came here to say this. He looked toward the girls. They are mine. Not by law, not by blood, not by contract. He looked at the townsfolk, but I saw them when no one else did. I stood up when others stayed seated. I gave them food, a roof, and a name they chose to speak. I didn't ask for their love. I didn't demand it. They gave it. And I gave mine back, quietly. He stepped forward. You want papers? I've got scars. You want witnesses? I've got 2 girls who sleep through the night now. That should be enough. May stood from the bench then. Walked to the front. I wrote this, she said. She handed the folded page to Reverend Holt. He read it aloud, voice trembling. We weren't rescued by a man with a badge. We were rescued by a man with silence. That's what made it real. He didn't promise us anything. He just stayed, and stayed, and stayed. Silence followed. Then Caroline stood. He doesn't owe us a defense, but we owe him a life. Ella stepped beside her. We already have a father, she said, and you're looking at him. No one said a word for a long time, not even Wiles, until finally the sheriff stepped forward, not as an official, just as a man. He looked at the stranger, then at the girls, then at Wiles, and said, You lost. Wiles rose, face flushed. This isn't binding. Reverend Holt raised his hand. It's over. Wiles slammed his folder shut and stormed out, his clerks trailing behind him. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the stranger turned to his girls and smiled. It was small, but it was real. That night at the cabin they made stew and fresh bread. Carolyn lit candles. Ella played harmonica by the fire. May added a new page to her journal. He didn't shoot anyone. He didn't threaten. He just stood there and told the truth. And for once, that was enough. Outside, the pines swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, a family sat around a table, not bound by law, but by love. It started with a question. They were sitting on the porch, sun slanting through the trees, wildflowers nodding in the breeze. The girls were playing a quiet game with polished stones. Caroline was reading aloud from a book of Psalms, and the stranger, Pa, was whittling a stick into something that might have been a bird or a memory. Ella looked up and asked, Where's our real father buried? The knife paused mid-slice. Caroline's voice faltered on the verse. Even May stopped stacking her stones. The air changed, not tense but reverent, like a church bell had rung without a sound. The stranger didn't look up. Why do you ask? Ella shrugged. We just thought maybe it's time we visited him. May added, We never got to say goodbye. Caroline's eyes met the stranger's, soft, sad, understanding. I could take them, she offered gently, but the stranger shook his head. No, I will. The next morning they left before sunrise. The sky was still purple when they saddled. The horses, with mist drifting low through the trees like breath not yet spoken. Caroline stayed behind, watching from the doorway, her shawl pulled tight as they rode out. The journey was quiet. They passed the bend in the creek, the burned-out fence line near Widow Tarse's old place. The girls pointed things out softly. That's where May fell in the mud. That's where Pa taught us to track a fox. That's where we saw the bear. He nodded, but mostly he listened. After 2 hours, they reached the old Cartwright homestead, or what was left of it. The house was gone, burned long ago. All that remained was the stone chimney, collapsed at its base like a broken monument, and the outline of the root cellar filled with ash and leaves. But the grave was there, marked by a flat stone the size of a man's chest, laid into the earth at the edge of the cottonwoods. It read, Caleb. Cartwright, beloved husband, father, taken too soon. There were no flowers, no signs of recent visits, just silence and the steady breath of the trees. The girls dismounted and walked slowly to the grave. The stranger followed behind, hat in hand. Ella knelt first. Then May. Neither cried. Ella traced the letters with her fingertips. "We thought you were still with us," she whispered. May sat down in the grass, pulling her knees close. "We missed you. A lot." The stranger stood back, not wanting to intrude, but not wanting to leave them alone either. Then May turned. "Will you come closer, Pa?" He froze, then stepped forward. His boots crunched on old leaves. He stood behind them, not knowing what to say. Ella looked up at him. "Do you think he'd be angry?" "That we call you Pa now?" The stranger shook his head slowly. "No." "How do you know?" "Because if he was half the man they say he was, he'd thank me." May reached up and took his hand, then asked, "Do you hate him?" The stranger blinked. "Why would I?" "Because he got to have us first." That made him kneel, right there beside them. He looked May in the eyes. "I don't hate him. I just wish he'd had more time." They stayed there for a long while. The girls laid down wildflowers they'd picked on the way. Ella sang softly, something their mother used to hum in the evenings, a lullaby about golden meadows and stars that never blinked. May added a new stone beside the headstone, small, smooth, carved with a single letter, P. The stranger didn't ask what it meant, but he knew they were laying down roots, old and new, side by side. As they turned to leave, Ella tugged on Pa's sleeve. "There's something else." He tilted his head. She pointed toward the trees. "There's another marker." He followed her to the edge of the woods, where a second stone sat sunken into the earth, half covered in moss. It was crude, no carving, just scratches. As if someone had run out of strength before they could finish, he knelt and brushed it clean, and froze, carved faintly, barely legible. E.M. He sat back hard. "What is it?" May asked. But he didn't answer right away, because he remembered that grave. He'd dug it himself, years ago, in a different life, a boy barely 16, a mother too sick to save, no preacher, no marker, just his initials beside hers. Ella knelt beside him. "You okay?" He nodded once, then whispered, "This is where I came from." May's eyes widened. "You mean—" He nodded again. "I was born 5 miles from here, left when I was 17, never came back." The girls were silent. Then Ella asked, "Why'd you come back for us?" He looked at them, tried to speak, failed, then managed, "Because this time I couldn't leave." They rode home slowly. The sun was high now, sky wide and blue. The wind followed them like a lullaby, soft and forgiving. They stopped once, at the edge of the creek, the same place he'd taught them to fish. May pulled out her journal. Ella handed her a pencil. "What are you writing?" Pa asked. May smiled. "A letter to both fathers." She wrote, "One left us with love, the other found us in pain. But they both gave us something that changed us. One gave us our name, the other gave it meaning." She folded the page, placed it under a flat stone at the water's edge. Let the wind decide what happened next. When they got home, Caroline met them on the porch. "How was it?" The stranger looked at her, then at the girls, then back at the trees, and said, "Holy." That night, he added a new entry in the Bible. Under the family names, he wrote, "Ella May Caroline," and underneath that, Pa. It came in a plain envelope, no seal, no name on the outside, just dust, smudged fingerprints, and a slight bend in the corner from being folded too long in someone's pocket. Sheriff Coulter handed it over at the general store, half-whispered, eyes down. "I wasn't going to say nothing," he muttered, "but thought you should see it, in case you're looking to contribute to your own salvation." The stranger didn't take it right away. He stared at it like it might bite. Then, finally, without a word, he tucked it into his coat and left the store. He didn't open it until he reached the ridge, under the pines, alone, where the only things that could hear him were the wind and the past. Inside the envelope was a single page, typed .formal, government, letterhead, Federal Marshal's Office, Southern Division confidential notice, bounty contract, target, Hector Graves, alias the Sawmill Butcher, Last seen, near Yuma, Arizona Territory. Charges, murder, 7 counts. Abduction 3, arson. Conspiracy known, associates dead or scattered. Current price, was him $1,500 alive, $1,000 dead. There was a final line, handwritten in black ink. Word is, he knew your name. Said he's waiting for you. No signature, no return address, just silence, and the sound of the wind picking up through the trees. That night the stranger sat at the table. Long after supper had been cleared, the paper folded in front of him like a ghost that wouldn't speak first. Caroline watched him from the stove, drying her hands. "You're not really thinking about it," she said softly. "I wasn't." "And now?" He didn't answer, but his hand tapped once against the edge of the table, just once. She crossed the room and sat beside him. "You've been clean of that life for a long time." He nodded. "They're not little anymore," he said finally. "They're growing. They'll want shoes, books, maybe a future that doesn't include squirrel stew and second-hand skirts. We're not starving. We're not secure either." Caroline looked him in the eyes. "They don't need Rich. They need you." He closed his eyes. "Graves is a monster. If I bring him in, alive or dead, we could build a life none of us ever dreamed. At what cost?" He opened his eyes, met hers. "That's what I came here to figure out." He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch while the stars shifted above him, the old cedar box open in his lap. Inside were 3 letters from the girls, his service coin from the war, the Bible, a carved wooden horse May had made him, and a ring he never wore but couldn't part with, his mother's. And now the bounty notice. He folded it again, gently, like it was something delicate, not dangerous. Just before dawn he saddled the horse. Caroline stood in the doorway. "You already decided?" He nodded once. "I won't be long." "Don't lie." He didn't. He rode out with the sunrise behind, him casting long shadows on the trail. He didn't take the main road. He cut through the ridges, past the old mining scar, through ravines and silent trails that had once been soaked in blood and thunder. It felt too familiar. That old part of him woke up easy, like it had been napping in the basement of his soul, waiting to be called again. His movements sharpened. His breath got slower. His eyes scanned like a hunter again. He hated how good it felt. In Yuma, the dust blew sideways, thick with salt and desert heat. The town buzzed with rumors of murders. In the canyons, of cattle mutilated without reason, of children gone missing. Most people didn't speak Hector Graves's name. The ones who did whispered it. The stranger found him in the most expected place, behind the sawmill near the dry riverbed where fire once burned through an entire quarter of town, blackened ruins, hollowed beams, cracked earth, and a chair placed dead center in the ashes, with Graves sitting on it, waiting, like he'd always known. "Well, hell," the man grinned when the stranger dismounted. "Took you long enough." Graves was big, thick in the neck. His shirt was open, chest like a brick wall covered in scars. One eye twitched when he talked, and the knife on his belt was polished sharp. "I heard stories," Graves said. "They said you laid your guns down, built a fence, took in little girls like a preacher at a mercy revival." The stranger didn't answer. "Is that true?" Graves grinned wider. "You playin' house now?" The stranger stepped forward. "No." Words just wind and weight. Graves stood slow. "You think you're here to kill me?" he asked. "Or save me?" The stranger reached into his coat. Graves reached faster, but the stranger was quicker. The bullet hit Graves in the leg before he even cleared leather. The next one hit his shoulder. The third shattered his wrist. He dropped like a sack of meat. Cursing, screaming, the stranger walked over and looked down at him. "I'm here to end it." Graves spat blood. "You're just like me." "No," the stranger said. "I used to be. Now I'm what you never learned to be." Graves laughed once, a gurgle in the throat. "What's that?" The stranger holstered his gun. "A father." He brought Graves in, tied across the back of his horse, alive. They paid him in cash. He didn't even count it, just rode home, straight, through 2 counties and a storm. The girls were waiting on the porch, Caroline too. He handed her the envelope before he spoke. I didn't do it for the money. I know. I did it because that man had blood on his hands, because maybe it was the only thing I still know how to do right. Caroline opened the envelope, counted slowly, then closed it. You're wrong, she said. About what? The only thing you do right, she pointed to the girls, is this. He nodded, set the rifle aside, and for the first time in weeks he exhaled, not in exhaustion, but in release. They had the money, they had safety, but more than that, they had each other, and he still had himself, just barely, but enough. The rain came without thunder, just a soft tapping at the roof, steady and patient, as if the sky were too tired to storm. It was the kind of rain that brought memories up from the soil, smells of old timber, wet leather, and nights spent under canvas tents with ghosts for company. Inside the cabin, the fire was low. Ella was sketching horses in the margins of her journal. May was sewing a patch into her coat. Carolyn sat at the table with her sewing kit open, humming an old hymn that neither girl recognized. The stranger stood near the door, watching the trees sway beyond the porch. He didn't say much these days, not because he had nothing to say, but because things finally felt right. And speaking too much, he feared, might wake whatever fate was sleeping nearby. Then came the knock, 3 soft taps, not urgent. Not timid either, just there. He turned. Caroline looked up. Ella paused mid-sketch. May froze, needle in hand. The stranger opened the door. A man stood there, thin, gray-bearded, dressed in a patched brown coat and wide-brimmed hat. His face was weather-beaten, but not dangerous. His eyes were pale and kind in the way of someone who'd seen too much and stopped judging what he saw. "You the one they call Pa?" the man asked. The stranger gave a slow nod. "Who's asking?" The man reached into his coat. The girls tensed. The stranger didn't blink. The man pulled out an envelope, worn, sealed with red wax, and offered it without a word. "I promised I'd deliver this if it was the last damn thing I did." The stranger didn't move. "Who sent it?" The man lowered his voice. "Said you'd know her by the name you buried?" The stranger's jaw tightened. Caroline stood. He took the envelope with a hand that trembled only slightly. The courier tipped his hat. "She said it wasn't for the war, or the blood, just the truth." Then he turned and walked into the trees, swallowed by mist and silence. He didn't open the letter inside, not at first. He stepped onto the porch and sat in the rocking chair, held the envelope in both hands, like it might fall apart under breath. The girls watched him through the window. Caroline joined him without speaking. After a long moment, he broke the seal. Inside was a single page, handwritten, careful, neat, the kind of writing learned in church schoolhouses, and polished. Over time, he read the first line and stopped breathing. "If you're reading this, it means I never came back. I knew I wouldn't, but I need you to know I never hated you for what happened in Dalton Hollow. I only hated the silence." That followed. Caroline watched him closely. He continued reading. "We were just kids when we made promises we didn't understand. I married someone else. You walked into war. But I never stopped wondering what you would have been if someone had just let you stay." The stranger's eyes stayed fixed to the page, but his soul was somewhere else. "And now they tell me I'm dying, that there's no fixing the damage. So I'm writing you, not for forgiveness, not even for memory, just to tell you that somewhere in this world is a daughter I had before anyone knew. Yours. I named her Sarah. She would be 19. Now, I gave her to a family in Oregon. You never knew. You couldn't. But maybe it's time someone did." He stopped. Caroline put a hand to her mouth. The wind blew stronger. Then he read the final words. "I hope you found peace. I hope you learned how to stay. If not for me, then for someone else. I believe in you, even now." It was signed. No last name, no need for one. The stranger folded the letter with slow, deliberate hands and slid it into his coat. Caroline didn't ask questions, but she said the one thing that mattered, "You're not alone." He nodded, but his eyes were distant now, searching. The next morning he saddled the horse again. Packed light, Caroline stood beside him. She'd be 19? He nodded. I don't know what I'll find. Caroline reached for his hand. You're not going to find anything, she said. You're going to be found. He met her gaze. I need to know. I know. The girls came running from the back trail. Are you leaving? Ella asked. Just for a while. Is it dangerous? May whispered. He looked at them both and smiled, soft but sure. Not like it used to be. They hugged him tight, one on each side. He held them longer than usual. When he let go, they stepped back. Don't be gone too long, Pa, May said. He nodded once and rode into the mist again. 3 days later, he crossed into Oregon. He asked around, stopped at churches, farms, town halls. No one had heard of a girl named Sarah, born to no one, but in the coastal town of Tillamook, he found a woman, older, wide-set eyes, sitting behind a desk at a records office. She remembered the letter M had sent 19 years ago. She remembered the arrangement, the adoption. She went to a family named Harrow, the woman said. 2 counties east, simple folk, good land, a little girl with dark hair and gray eyes. He nodded. Do they still live there? They do. He tipped his hat and set off again. The Harrow farm was quiet, apple trees in bloom, a porch swing creaking in the wind. A young woman was out front, feeding chickens. Her hair was pulled back. Her eyes were gray. She turned when she heard the horse. Paused, then stood. He dismounted slowly, took off his hat. Name's Boone, he said softly. Used to go by a different one. She tilted her head. Something in her face shifted. Recognition? Instinct? Maybe just curiosity. I knew your mother, he added. A long time ago, the girl, Sarah, set down the feed bucket. My folks said I was adopted. Said she died when I was little. She did. He stepped forward, hands shaking. I think I'm your father. She stared at him a long time, then stepped off the porch, walked right up to him, and hugged him, not like a stranger, not like a child needing proof, but like someone who had been waiting for a missing piece her whole life. He stood frozen. Then, slowly, gratefully, he hugged her back. She whispered, You smell like firewood. He laughed, choked. You smell like spring. That night he sat with the Harrows on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the sun go down. They were kind, didn't ask for anything, didn't seem surprised. He talked about Carolyn, about Ella and May, about the cabin in the pines, and how he didn't think he'd ever earn that kind of peace. Sarah sat beside him the whole time, listening, smiling. At one point she said, Can I meet them someday? He looked at her. I'd like that. So would I. He paused. You sure you don't hate me for not knowing, for not coming sooner? She shook her head. No, I don't hate you. Why not? She smiled, the same way May did when she forgave him before he asked. Because you came. 2 weeks later, he rode back into Shallow Creek. The cabin stood just as he left it, smoke in the chimney, chickens in the yard, and 3 souls on the porch, waiting like it had never been more natural to believe he'd come home. He stepped off the horse. Caroline kissed him. Ella ran into his arms. May held up a drawing she made. 4 people under one tree. A 5th figure walking toward them. He looked at it, then at them, and said softly, We've got someone coming to visit.